perspective of an EU delegation, because the EU delegations have a specific role to consult and inform and support civil society in third countries, not only through financing and projects, but also through a constant dialogue and a meaningful dialogue, hopefully. But also, if you restrict it to human rights defenders, it could have also a protection role. But the question is also how to strengthen this relation, and not only what can EU delegation do for CSOs, but what CSOs can do for this dialogue and for this dialogue to be meaningful and rich as much as possible. We will take your question after the presentation. I will already leave the floor to Carla for her presentation. You're welcome, Carla.
Yes, I think I will just say briefly about Timor-Leste, give an introduction, and then I will ask to be excused and I will turn off my video because our internet is really slow here, not to affect.
Sorry, I saw some people arrived recently. We will indeed turn off our cameras as soon as possible to preserve the connection. It seems to be quite stable so far, Carla, and I think your presentation would be maybe more lively if we can see you. But if as soon as it turns bad, then of course you could.
Yes.
Thank you.
So, good morning to everybody. It's afternoon here in Timor-Leste, 3:30, and just to give you some context. That is always good to start with the context. So Timor-Leste used to be a Portuguese colony. It's a small island that the east of the island is Timor-Leste and the west of the island is Indonesia. And we still have one district inside Indonesia that is one of the districts from Timor-Leste, but it's the youngest democracy in Asia. They got their independence in 2002. It was hard work for the Timorese. They resisted for 25 years, Indonesia. Indonesia today has good relationship with Timor-Leste, and they are also considered best practice for peace and conflict resolution. Today we also have Dr. Ramos Horta as our president here in Timor-Leste, who was also awarded a Nobel Prize. And in general, I think we are really blessed here in Timor-Leste with the context that we have, because it's we have a positive open civic space that doesn't have for the rest of Asia in general and many parts of the world, so to speak. It's a small country, 1.3 million. Even though Portuguese and Tetum are both, considered national languages, majority of the population, they don't speak Portuguese. All the law is in Portuguese here because of the Portuguese influence, but they have more than 13 local languages. And the government, civil society, international NGO development partners, I would say they all get along pretty well, and the government has actually a good relationship with civil society. Could be more meaningful, but it's pretty good for what it is now. So I think in a nutshell, that is the setting that we are here in Timor-Leste. I also have to say that most of my life and my career, I work with civil society. So I really appreciate the work that you do. And I think it's very important. We all know that there is no democracy if there is no strong civil society. And I think it's one of the basis for why the EU really values civil society. It's a key actor for them when working, and for us now when working with our partners now in third countries. I started to work in the delegation here in 2019, and so I've been in charge of what Benjamin already said: civil society, human rights, democracy, gender, and elections as well. And then, so basically, I'm working here in Timor-Leste at the delegation, but what we are trying to do here, it's which actually every delegation should be also doing. So I'll be sharing my experience here, and I hope that this will inspire you to also be thinking how you or your partners, our colleagues in Timor-Leste or in the other countries they are, will also help them to reach out and engage in meaningful partnerships with the EU. Because at the end, I think that's what we really want. The EU used to be DevCo, right? The Development Cooperation, now it's international partnerships. And I think they really understood that that is the bottom line. Yes, the EU gives funding that is necessary for civil society, but it's much more than that. And we could be much more than that for civil society as well. So basically for each delegation, we have to have a roadmap that is our blueprint on how we will be working with civil society. Every delegation should have one roadmap to engage with civil society, where they will specify their objectives, have the priorities that is aligned with the EU priority. For this roadmap, it's a must that you with civil society, and then you'll be as well. For Timor-Leste, our roadmap is 21-23. So next year we'll be probably updating, revising, seeing if we'll update, if we'll make a new one. This is a special year for Timor-Leste because we have in a week parliamentary elections, and at the end of the year we have village leaders elections, kind of municipal elections, Suku village, Suku Chefi. And then last year we have presidential elections. So it's an important year for us because we hope things will continue as they are in a way that the country has really worked towards trying to do what is best for the people. But we know that, politics are politics. So we will see. In our roadmaps, we have basically, and I would say all roadmaps will be aligned with the key priorities from the EU, which is basically we want to have closer partnership between the EU, civil society, and the government of Timor-Leste to improve and promote the enabling environment. So enabling environment, it's a key word for most of the CSO's roadmaps. For Timor-Leste, it's pretty okay because we, like I said before, we have a good civic space here, and civil society, they can work and they can dialogue with the government consults civil society. So that is not a must of it, but much of a challenge for us, considering other countries in the region. Then we also would like to be looking to supporting civil society to promote human rights, peace, development, the areas that will be priorities for the delegation here and the government of Timor-Leste. Then we would be looking to supporting civil society as well, efforts to promote social accountability, just as a way like to improve, the quality and effectiveness of public policies. And of course, we want also to foster partnerships between the government and civil society. How we will do that? So basically, if you read our roadmap for Timor-Leste, you will see that we will try to do through funding for share call for proposals, and then call for proposals because
Carla,
we have,
I hope you can
as
hear
you
me.
well know, I was a
Sorry
document
to
from
interrupt
March
you.
this year, funding and the recommendations. Yes.
I don't know about the others, but here you've been cutting a lot in the last minute. So I suggest maybe it's time to unfortunately cut off your camera. Yeah.
No problem.
Sorry. Thank you very much.
Let's try. And then interrupt me if the connection is bad.
Sure. Thank you.
Timor-Leste has our internet here is 25 times slower than the rest of Asia, so bear with me. But so going back, our roadmap to civil society, how we will implement that, or how we will really support, in implementing these objectives. So we are talking about funding to start, and we are also aware that most of the time when we have corporate proposal, we notice that the usual suspects would be the ones that, would the international NGOs would be the one that really would be awarded the grants. And we recognize the great work they do, but we also want to support the local civil society, which is really the one that is the basis for our work here, the Timorese civil society. So in a way, how we could do that? When I start working here, because I was working with civil society before, I was hired when I was in Timor-Leste already for 3 years. First thing in our first dialogue, they said we have to change the procedures. It's so complicated, which I totally agree, and it's not fair because international NGOs, they always get the grant and we don't get anything. Reality is that we, at least from our side here, the delegation, we cannot change that. Yes, we can bring this always, to Brussels and mention, how can we make this easier or less complicated. But at the end of the day, we do have the systems and the process that we have. So for Timor-Leste, what we decided that is included in our roadmap after talking to civil societies, that first, international NGOs, when they apply, or NGOs in general, when they apply to a call for proposal in Timor-Leste, they must be in Timor-Leste. We want to really support civil society here, and we don't want an NGO that's not working here and know the context coming and then starting something, and there is not much to sustainability in the long term. So for the last call for proposal, for example, that was really finalized in the right way. So NGOs, they have to be here to access the funding. If they are international, they must have a co-applicant that is the local civil society. And also, every call for proposal, we have sub-grants or financial support to third parties as a way to support even the smaller CSOs. Also, when we have this call for proposals, international NGOs, they can just apply once, but local civil society, they can be in more than one concept note or application, meaning they can be co-applicant for more than one concept note or two or three, or, so we increase their probability of getting some funding. So that is, we try to have a call for proposal every year as well. Last year we have the right to rise for women's economic empowerment. And then we have another one, which was the first funding in Timor-Leste specifically target for LGBT and persons with disability, social and economic empowerment, because it's also part of our human rights country strategy. And even though we know we want to include the most vulnerable, and usually you see that word in the calls for proposal, we realized we really want to put the money where our mouth is, meaning that we really target this call for proposal for persons with disability and LGBT. So trainings, and then dialogue, which is the structure, inclusive dialogue that every delegation is asked to put in place, and a meaningful dialogue. I was even reading in your CONCORD funding for civil society in the NDIC, global, that Benjamin shared with me. Very interesting. And here it says that today primarily partnership today, EU civil society is primarily based formal consultation process, such as the dialogues. I will say that it's just one part of what we do here with civil society. And I would say it's even like a consequence of something much more important, which is the ongoing communication that we try to have here. So when we do have the dialogues, it's much more meaningful. And we'll get to that. But my point is we really want, and when I say we, is I'm talking from the EU perspective. Like I reach out to civil society, like the focal point for civil society, human rights, democracy, really needs to know who is doing what, and then we can have a conversation, understand what they are doing. They can also know us. So dialogues are there, but they are not the main important thing, you know, from what we do here, at least in the delegation. So these dialogues, we usually hold them at FONCTIL, which is like the national um, NGOs as CSOs umbrella organization here in Timor-Leste. So CSOs, in order to be registered, they have to be registered at the Ministry of Justice and at FONCTIL. So we always held our dialogues there at FONCTIL. We invite not just the CSOs that have funding from the EU, but also the CSOs that would like to have funding, the CSOs that are active. And then I have to say, Timor-Leste, we have around 250 CSOs, the whole country. Around 27, they are international NGOs, and the rest, they are local NGOs. But because of the funding challenging, sometimes they're not active, right? They are just there. So we try to make sure that we have representation for our dialogues. We invite the Girls Alliance, for example, UNTL, which is the university academia, and journalists, the Press Association, and they have three organizations here. We have also the church that we invite, the Catholic Church, and then we have normal CSOs, but making sure we have persons with disability CSOs, women focused CSOs, etc. Youth, blah, blah, blah. One thing that was very important for us to change here for our context as well, and we started that last year. Usually we have at least 2 dialogues per year, is that we are doing now in Teto, our dialogues. I speak Teto, which is 30% of Portuguese. It's like a um, so I speak Portuguese as well, so it was easier for me to learn Tetum. But anyways, what I'm saying is like we have to speak the language from civil society if we do want to have a meaningful dialogue and really be partners. So that it was very important and changed the whole game because we had double participation. And usually our dialogues we structure in a way that we have the FONCTIL representative with us, and then the ambassador is always willing to participate as well, or the political advisor. So we have the political section here working together with us with the cooperation section. And then we'll share what's happening from our side, meaning updates about call for proposal. And then if I have more information ready, I will be sharing more information and trainings. If we have any programming or anything that we have to prepare, we would be doing consultations. For example, for the MIP, we presented, we asked them what would be the priorities for our MIP, and then they give us the feedback, and then we would take that feedback. Then the next dialogue, they would validate what we bring back. At the same time, we're doing the same thing with the government, international partners. And then we have also which is usually the first part of our session, the dialogue, is the peer-to-peer session, where we have one of the civil societies, civil society organizations sharing about a hot topic that is interesting for them, be it a research that they've done that was interesting, or last year, for example, the government finally ratified the Convention for Persons with Disability after years that they were discussing the ratification. And then we had this local CSO that works with the person with disabilities rights, just sharing like what is next now for us as the government ratify, how should we move on. So usually it's like 20 minutes presentation that we have, 20 with maximum 10 PowerPoint slides. And then we have minimum 30 minutes bigger group discussion around it. And if we have also the ambassador with us, or the head of cooperation, or the political advisor, they also sometimes they share something from their side. For example, once the ambassador share a bit about our work, our political work with the government here, and how it crosses with the cooperation work. And we always follow with Q&A, questions and answers. The political advisor once also came last year, because when we had the presidential election last year, we also had the government ask for a European observation mission, which was granted. So around 50 people came to Timor-Leste a month before elections, left after elections, and they were also working with civil society. So she gave like an update about, after, when we had the report, and then we asked civil society what was their feedback on that, etc. So this is the dialogue that at least twice a year we have. Once a year, we try to have one dialogue around gender equality, because as you know, by 2025, 85% of the EU external action, or whatever we do, has to contribute to gender equality as a G1 or G2, as a significant objective or the principal objective. Um, and then besides the dialogue, we also have training for civil society. Timorese civil society and Timor-Leste in general, human capital, it's a challenge for them, considering their past and the many years that they were under Indonesian occupation. Nutrition is still a challenge in here, malnutrition. So we try to have every year trainings, relevant trainings for them. Last year, because we planned trainings for 2020, and we cannot follow up because of COVID. The government just basically shut down the island. Airports, they were closed. We were all here. The EU people, nobody left, and we could continue working with them. But in terms of training, it was impossible, because as you see now, our internet is horrible. We tried to do something online, but it was not possible. So last year, we finally could do the trainings that were supposed to happen in 2020 and 2021. We had to do in 2022. First, we have a training for EU proposal writing, how to write, concept notes and full application for the EU. And then the second training we had about advocacy, governance, strategy, and communications. Yes. And what we did as well, because remember, civil society, um, the bigger NGOs, they do work in English, and the medium one, okay, but the majority no, right? So we did in English, but because we had the expert coming, but we had simultaneous translation to Tetu. And so we have trainings. And then we also have an open door approach to really try to establish like a partner relationship, meaning that myself as focal point for civil society, I need to know, and again, this is a smaller context compared to other delegations, so it is possible for me to try to know who is doing what. We also did a CSO mapping 2020, which was unfortunately impacted by COVID, so we could not really do as we planned, but we have an idea of who is doing what and where in all the districts. We are now updating this map next year, as we have to update our roadmap. We also update this mapping. But then we know who is doing what, and I know them and they don't me. So besides funding and besides punctual like situations that we'll be talking about, or trainings or whatever is needed, they also know that they can talk to us and in a good way coordinate with us to pressure the government in some aspects. For example, in 2021, end of 2021, the Minister of Justice here, they were talking about this defamation law, that anyone that would speak badly about the government or ex-government people or the church, they could be put in jail. So one of the CSOs asked to have a meeting with the ambassador to talk to him about, their concerns about this law. We were also monitoring as hell, but that led to the ambassador asking for a meeting with the Minister of Justice to share the EU concerns about this, draft, the law that it's now kind of in the file because there is a new Minister of Justice, but also could share the concerns from civil society themselves. And that's what we really try to do. We try to support civil society as we can through funding, to training, and all this. But we want to be closer to the organizations and to you all, so we can really do this together. And then when Benjamin said was mentioning like what are the things that sometimes we were talking before could be CSOs could be better in doing to really position themselves. I would say briefly, because I see it, I already spoke for 30 minutes, sorry. It's that CSOs, they need to know the EU, because at the end of the day, yes, they want, or if they need funding, most of them need, but they also need support, in the different process that they are engaged on different thematic areas. They really need to understand us. And I know there are different development partners with different priorities, right? So, but specifically for call for proposal, for example, which we see that doesn't happen as we read the concept notes. And I always tell them, guys, you have to read in advance, read our priorities, our MIP, our CLIP, which is the country level implementation plan for the gender action plan 3, and the priorities there, what we are doing in human rights. Because once you have this information, it will be easier for you to write then your concept note, which is very unfortunate. Sometimes I know the CSOs that are applying, and unfortunately, it's really hard for them then to land with a good concept note, a good written concept note. And since we have to evaluate this after, it is difficult and it's a big job to write proposals and concept notes for the EU. So that's why we have to do. I tell them we have to do this, start this work before the calls come, and then position the organization, meaning you have to reach out to us. I know I reach out here to civil society, but even if I would not, in case, which I understand some delegations, it's more of a challenging this aspect. You have to reach out, and it is our duty actually to get to know civil society and to see how we expire. And we just get there if we talk to each other. So please reach out today. You stay in touch and then present yourself. Even if you are a partner, for sure, like if there is a new ambassador, for example, or a new head of cooperation, please, ask, for introduction meeting. Even if you are not a EU partner, still you can ask for introduction meeting to present your organization. And then once I know, but then my colleagues also have to know you. And it's part of our duty as well, that we are doing civil society mainstreaming in the delegation as well, not just my portfolio, but my colleague from climate change or trade. Everybody has to be hopefully doing mainstreaming, civil society mainstreaming, so it's good for them also to know you. For example, here I share with civil society the focal points for who is in charge of all these different portfolios that we have here in the delegation. um, Many times as well, we have Brussels or regional partners or whatever contacting us to know, do you know who is the civil society that works in this or that area? Would you recommend it for this or that, which civil society? So of course, it's we want to point out who is doing what, and we are trying to see, but it's much more positive if civil society also reach out, so we can be together in this. Then when we have the dialogues, another aspect, and this is always speaking from my experience here, when civil society participates in our dialogues, and not just dialogues, because we also have political dialogues, policy dialogues and sector steering committees, and civil society is always invited as observers. But sometimes, even in our EU civil society dialogue, they don't take the opportunity to speak, which is a shame. So I tell them, like, when you participate, doesn't mean just attending, like, signing the participation and leaving. It really means speak up, like, and I encourage them to use their voice to really share their perspective, their concerns, their questions. Here we have our ambassador always tells us, like, when we go to any meeting, and then of course we are representing the EU in discussions with the government of civil society or whoever, we cannot afford to be quiet. We have to always, share what is our perspective. So the same for civil society. So also when going to a different meeting that is not even organized by the EU, but I always encourage them, like, if you see someone from the EU, go there and talk to them, like start this pre-positioning in a way, establishing this relationship. And then, of course, then we have the call for proposal, which when it comes, if civil society is already doing what I said before, like it already read and participate and gave their saying on the different documents and programming documents that we have to have here, and they are also in touch with us, then it will be much easier for them to write also the concept note for the call for proposal. For us here in Timor-Leste as well, we see that it's best if they avoid consultants, because consultants will come and they will work a concept note for them, but then they leave and then they end up with their implementation by themselves. So we see it much more positive if they can really try to have this process as their own process. If they want to have a consultant, of course, because it's a skill anyways too, but we try to encourage them to really be involved in this. And then when working on the call for proposal, always, because they already read everything related to the EU, they will be mentioning this in their concept notes as well. With the EU priorities, they will be mentioning our objectives as roadmap to civil society and the CLIP and human rights strategy, and be considering green, digital, youth, and gender, etc. I think maybe I need to stop and give you some space to make questions. I would just like to briefly touch what
yes,
you
please.
asked me, Ben, about human rights defenders. For Timor-Leste, hope in a good way, we don't have any situation here that we have to deal with any situation of human rights defenders and really protection. But I do know, so we are not working, and like you said, this is more for the political session, that they would be contacting Brussels and they would activate this support for human rights defenders in case of need. And I understand that NGOs in Europe would be then in charge of coordinating with those human rights defenders here, what is next. But yes, there is a mechanism that the delegations, they can access and they can initiate. But here in Timor-Leste, thankfully, we don't need that. And also Team Europe, you asked about Team Europe. We have just one member state there in Timor-Leste, which is, as you imagine, Portugal. And for Global Gateway, we're still in the process of working to see, well, from my perspective of working with society, we are now having our next dialogue where the ambassador will be talking about Global Gateway and we'll bring to our context and then what does it mean. But I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Carla. I hope you can hear me. I will take a risk and put back on the camera to make the discussion a little bit more lively. Thank you again, Carla. I really personally enjoyed this discussion. think it's very refreshing to hear the EU not talk too much about acronyms and Global Gateway and Team Europe initiatives, but you did it in the end. So I guess this is unavoidable.
You asked me.
Yeah,
you asked me about it. So.
It's true.
But let's avoid acronyms, please.
Yeah, this is tough, actually, when talking about the EU, to avoid acronyms. We will take questions. I don't see any yet, but while people are formulating their questions or just catching their breath after this presentation, I have many, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation. But before I see actually Blanca, you have a question. No? Okay, we'll see. We can hear you, Blanca, so we will see in a few minutes if it works. I guess to start with, I want to go back to what you said, Carla, about a very small thing you did say in the beginning about inviting those CSOs that also do not receive funding from the EU, which I think is not only important, but also echoes one of the recommendations of our report that we published maybe last year, called Give Space, about exactly what you talked about, ensuring meaningful and inclusive dialogue with CSOs at the local level. If I have not done it, I will definitely share it with you. But about funding, I'm wondering if there's a reflection at the delegation around funding to CSOs as a part of supporting their right of initiative and defining their own priorities, as opposed to funding through CSOs where they are only implementing partners. So do you make this difference? And is it something you take into account? Do you do some sort of core funding to local CSOs as well?
I don't understand what you mean. Sorry.
I understand. Do you support the functioning of local CSOs as opposed to just giving them access to grants to implement projects that have been predetermined by the EU?
Oh, I have to say, when we have the call for proposal, one of the points that they mentioned during our conversations, and I have to say, I try to have every 6 months, maybe, like a catch up with at least some key of the CSOs and mostly the local ones on the different sectors that we work. And these are actually more meaningful for me, I think, and for them. This one-to-one conversation than the dialogue itself. The dialogue is great. I think it's important, and also because we have everybody, and most of the ones participating, they don't have the grants, the EU grants, which I think it's important. But they were always mentioning this aspect that, oh, we're just funding, like okay, gender equality, like gender-based violence is really bad in Timor-Leste. 75% of women, they experience that. So you want us always to deliver this service, but what about our organizational, capacity? And when we totally agree, so now we always encourage them, and we have in our, I'm sure we're all kind of aware about the guidelines that we have, the activities, right? And we always include there, because it comes from them as well, activities for organizational capacity, meaning that they can have financial training, they can have results-based management training, because they will be working. Reality is that, also I forgot to mention that usually when we have our cost proposal, we are talking about at least 500,000 euros, which is a big amount for the majority of CSOs here, because they don't manage that funding. Most of the CSOs, we are talking about 200, let me have the number there, 255. It's really like small funding. But those are the ones that will be forever here. Those are the ones that are important, and were important for Timor-Leste and will be important for Timor-Leste. So that's why we need to really support them. And so we have included, and they can include, and we say, include in your budget support for civil society, or meaning they as co-applicants, or even not co-applicants, but you can justify. You can always justify. Also, for example, we encourage them to include as well, for example, I have to say, because Timor-Leste, because of their history, and I think because of development partners like role in the last years as well, just like project service delivery, they always tend to have this, like you said, no? It's just funding what we need wants to be done. But we need to think outside the box. So basically we are encouraging them to think, what about the media? If we are having a project on gender equality, if we're having a project on digital youth or green business for women, always try to include as well in your budget some training for the media. So we are helping the media to report on these issues. We know the capacity from the media is really limited here. In general, human capacity in Timor-Leste is a challenging, but I mean, it's simple. This is what you're doing, you do it well. You will help the media to be empowered on how to best report these topics, but also, and I think this is very important too, you start to have you start to establish a relationship with the media. So it's not just like, oh, let's contact the journalists because we have the event and when the pictures and the visibility. No, they will see you as a very important resource. We are also trying to encourage in civil society to understand how experts they are in all these topics, and many times more than the government. Um, so if the media starts to really, tap into this source, it will be much more meaningful for everybody. And also government-wise, there will be more value as well. As civil society, as the experts that are here. You don't have to bring someone from outside.
Thank you very much. Indeed, very important to remind how even the smallest CSOs are experts in their sometimes very specific topics, but they are experts. This is very an important thing to remember for decision makers. I will read the question from my colleague Blanca, which is about procedures that you mentioned. The one of the most important probably obstacle to smaller CSOs is accessing and being able to navigate the processes of the EU, which are famously complicated. You said you mentioned this in the beginning. What would be your recommendations for small CSOs to overcome this obstacle? Form consortia maybe to get help from a bigger NGO. What do you think? What are the best practices here?
For us here, because we know our funding, the minimum amount usually is too high for them to apply. We have very open, transparent communication. We say, guys, you won't be able to get this funding. And it's a lot of work, and we don't want them to spend all this time and money at the end for something that will not work out. So that's why now we made it mandatory to have a co-applicant and financial support third parties. So we tell two things. First, to local civil society, we say, choose the international before any call for proposal comes. And that applies also to the other development partners. So we're not just doing this for the EU, but for the USAID, for Australia, choose the international NGOs that are really aligned to what you do. Who are those people out there that you really would like to partner and be working with? And then you can already establish like kind of agreements, pre-agreements. So when the call for proposals comes, both of them, like the international NGO and the local CSO, they already know, oh, I already have, I don't know, an agreement with ADRA or with CARE. So then, okay, let's talk. Yeah, we're going for this. So it's much faster. And also then include in your budget organizational capacity for them. And it will depend on the size of the CSO. They may be the co-applicants if they are medium. It will be okay. But if they are smaller, then they'll probably want financial support third parties. And then I have an example last year when we have the election observation mission. As every full election of EU observation mission, there is an official final report that is shared with everybody with the recommendations. We had last year we had human rights instrument funding for a call for proposal, and it was actually 1 million euros for, and then we decided to go with LGBT and persons with disability. Then Ukraine happened, and Brussels said, guys, we are taking a little bit from calls for proposal from this instrument because we don't know what will happen in Ukraine for civil society there. At the end of the year, they said, oh, you can have this money back, because at the end they had enough money for Ukraine and we could have this money back. But then, because we already had the information and the ongoing communication with civil society, they already told us, they gave us their feedback about those recommendations from the report. And they said, and this we are talking about 6 local CSOs, very small CSOs. They said, oh, we could help with 5 of the recommendations to support the government. So what we did, we negotiated with Brussels for a direct grant. So we had an international NGO being the lead of the consortium, and 6 local NGOs groups, even like women's parliamentary group, like smaller, having a 600,000 funding for this direct grant, which is it was great, but it's not easy. And we know, just in situations of crisis during COVID, we also had that flexibility, which was great, because as you know, it takes around 6 months for the whole call for proposal from the public, even more if we consider our work pre-publication until the final award. It's a long process and it's not good for nobody, right? So unfortunately, we don't have that much flexibility for us here at the delegation to really have these direct grants, which in some situations, it's really the best way to go, because then we can fast address, situations, especially that we had elections this year. So it was a positive negotiation with Brussels, but it's not always easy.
Thank you. In relation to that, before we take Anna's question and Donna Maria's question, you mentioned the paper that I sent you out of CONCORD Europe. It was not us in CONCORD Sweden who made it, even though we share some of the conclusions. But it talks about CSO funding under the new instrument, or the latest instrument, NDICI Global Europe, and the fact that they seem to have observed that the ceilings for minimum funding has increased, that direct grants has increased, that overall funding to CSOs and through CSOs have decreased, because, well, for many reasons, one of them being that one of the privileged partners is now Team Europe, or European development agencies under the Team Europe approach. So I don't know about exactly the local context of Timor-Leste, but at the global level, there seems to be observable facts that funding through smaller CSOs is unfortunately decreasing. Yes, may I turn to Anna? You had a question from Plan.
Yes, hello, I'm Anna from Plan. I know that you are working with a number of my colleagues closely, Carla, so thank you. I just wanted to say that I think it's really excellent to hear about that you're allowing CSOs to be on multiple proposals, because I know that this has been quite a barrier, and some of our umbrella partners that we've worked with have ended up not getting to go forward because they accidentally had another umbrella member in another proposal, and that immediately disqualified them. So I just really want to commend you on that, and I think it's excellent that that seems to be something that we could encourage other delegations to do, because I think you're very correct in your assessment that that would probably allow for more possibility for a variety of CSOs to be funded. So I just wanted to verify if that's something within the flexibility of all EU delegations to do, so then we could also encourage that in some of our advocacy work. And then, yeah, just to commend what someone said in the chat about using the preferred language of communication of local civil societies. And then just in general, your approach, it's really excellent. And I mean, I think as Plan, even though we are a large INGO, we do have sponsorship communities. So we're really committed to long-term work. And we have really appreciated the work with the delegation there in Timor-Leste, and are really excited about the current projects around persons with disabilities, LGBTQI, and then the opportunity with the direct grant that we could support some on that. So just to also thank you. But yeah, the question is around how much flexibility is there on letting CSOs be on multiple proposals.
I would say it could apply to any delegation. In fact, in March, when they had the annual forum for EU delegations focal points for youth, rights, human rights, democracy, gender in Brussels, they actually invited me to present about our work with civil society here because it's considered best practice. So I was sharing with everybody, and everybody was saying, yeah, you know, we should try to to go this way. But like I said, I also here working with other CSO partners, and when we have our monthly calls, they share about some challenges working with other delegations. But I would encourage you to really push in a nice way, because I think it's really and Brussels really supports us in that because it makes sense and it's really aligned to what they are asking us to do. So it's really a matter of deadlines. For us, I mean, you did the civil society and local civil society, because I think that's a struggle everywhere, that they really, local civil society, but of course some contexts are totally different from Timor, but for us here, it is tough for them, for the local ones, because they do see international ones, you know, with being the lead, and that can be frustrating. So.
Thank you, Carla. I cut off my camera for a little bit because you cut off. I don't know if it made a difference. I have another question, since I don't see any. Well, actually, my colleague Donna Maria also talked about the importance of allowing local partners to communicate and have access to information in their local language, which is also something that Anna mentioned. And this is also part of the recommendations we make in the report I mentioned earlier. So this is actually very important, if you want to maybe add something on that.
Yes. Oh, so I speak Tetu, and when I'm always sharing with them by email, just information about us, like, you know, trainings or documents, but also whatever I see that's interesting, be it on LinkedIn, or I get this information from someone else, because I used to work with NGOs before, so I still have my friends and contacts. I always share with them, but I also make sure, because I have a mailing list that is mostly non-EU partners, I also have Tetu and English, so that everybody understands. And they all have my WhatsApp, so if they have any question or they understand something, we just did a 3 questions survey, because last year we did our last training in August. And then this year we are trying to have another training, but we are figuring out which topics, you know, based on their final evaluation last year, what they would like next. So I prepared like these 3 questions survey, and it was really hard, even like in Tetu and in English, of course, but some of the smaller organizations, they were really have a hard time to understand. So I had to, over the phone, like explain everything. But I think this is very important, and it's something that we thankfully really work well with the political section here. So whatever we have, we don't have every document in Tetu, because that would be difficult for us, logistically speaking, but I do try to have summaries in Tetu of key documents and then share with them. So this ongoing regular communication, it's really, I think, what is the key for us, because when we went to the forum, like we were talking about the dialogue, which is very important, but I think to get to the good dialogue, we need to have this ongoing communication before. So yeah, that's it.
Great. It's I note you mentioned that the partners have your WhatsApp number. This is interesting.
Yeah.
And you mentioned also the open door policy that the delegation has. Yeah. I can't help but
it's in the roadmap. You can check. Yeah. I can send to you. So it should be good. There.
Yeah. But the problem is, you may have heard that recently the Commission has decided to take off the names and contacts numbers of Commission employees under the level of head of units, and that includes delegations, which is both a problem for local partners, for CSOs in Europe, as well as for any kind of lobbyist you would imagine. But for us CSOs, it's a problem, and especially to guarantee this open door policy. Well, I guess you don't have an easy solution to that. I just wanted to point it that a petition is on the way on this to bring back the contact information of delegation, especially CSO focal points at the local level, which is very important.
Exactly, I agree.
On another, maybe more general question, it seems that in the context of Timor-Leste, everything is kind of conducive. It's a favorable environment to a meaningful dialogue with CSOs, not only because they have you as a very engaged person for CSOs. I can, from my experience, tell you that most delegations do not have a person that is so aware of the importance of civil society and engaged in this topic. But they also, like, the government seems to be more supportive than in other countries. It's maybe the right scale in a way, the country to have a meaningful dialogue. So would you think that the best practice that you mentioned today are reproducible? How much can they be repeated in other contexts, in larger, more complicated countries, maybe?
I really think that if we have an engaged person working at the delegation, it makes the difference. And I really mean engaged, like referring to what we shared before. If I'm the focal point for civil society, I have to be the focal point, meaning I have to know these people and they have to know me. Otherwise, it's not a focal point. I don't know what it is, but I think it is possible in a more challenging context than Timor-Leste. Of course, it will be as well more complicated, you know, and not as straightforward as here, but it is possible. No control over the government's attitudes, you know, and procedures, etc. So here, like I said before, we are in good space. Even though I also have to say that yes, government does consult civil society, but it could be more meaningful. So we are also trying to get to that stage where it is really not just a checking box of having like a meeting to consult civil society and then the meeting is over and that's it. So there are always areas for improvement. But I think from the EU perspective, there is some work to do in general.
I think that's a good last reflection to maybe end our conversation. I see Anna has another commentary on the chat. I'm trying to read it at the same time. How do you think...
I think it's fine.
Yes, you can say it, Anna.
I just wanted to say, how do you think we could be even better partners as INGOs? I think, you know, we want to work with civil society strengthening as our theory of change, but as you said, the reality of some of the minimums and that sort of thing make it that often INGOs do have to support. But what do you think we can do to sort of support the work even more to ensure that local CSOs have as much opportunity as possible?
Well, here talking to the INGOs, I see that most of them, they're really going to this next step that everybody is going off decentralization or really looking into local CSOs to have not just, oh, we have a partnership for this project, but a long-term partnership, like being more intentional on who they will be working with. Like some of them are having like memorandums of understanding agreements, pre-agreements, because they don't want just to be linked with an action, but also how they can, because as you know, you can have some funding sometimes and not related to a specific project, but you could also be doing something, you know, as for a group, for example. Yeah, I think also because at the end of the day, you also don't want the local civil society to see international NGOs like just reaching out when they need us, you know, for this funding, which they will lead. So it's really to have some time to reflect how can we have a partnership that maybe it will not be just around the funding, but it could be something. Yesterday, for example, we had a meeting with a local civil society that was the pioneer for LGBTI here. And very interesting because she said, funding is very important. We need funding, but we also need so much visibility, and we also need to be part in the discussions that we are not invited to. So you as international NGOs, you do have that access to many of the meetings that the local CSOs don't have. So maybe the question for reflection would be, how can we bring them to the table, to these discussions? As an expat in this, Timor-Leste or in third countries, we have a special status in a way. We are more considered sometimes than the locals, even though they may know much more than we know.
Thank you so much.
That's great. I think we're almost right on time, 9:32. Thank you so much again, Carla. I think in the name of everyone, this was a very, very interesting presentation, a little bit different and more honest than what we're often used to with EU officials, unfortunately. But that is very concrete, and your experience, I think, really showed in the presentation. I can even think it's maybe not the last time we hear of you, because I would like to continue the conversation and learn more a little bit about your experience and your recommendations.
From August on, I will be working in Laos.
Very interesting. So we can meet in a year when you got used to Laos, and you can tell us about the context.
Completely different context. Yes.
Great.
Okay,
thank you,
everybody.
Carla.
Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye,
Have a nice
everyone.
day. Bye.
Bye-bye.